Minato Namikaze's story begins not with thunder or triumph, but in the quiet lull of a hidden village cradled by mountains and trees, where the wind seemed always to whisper of promise and potential. In the early days of the hidden leaf, long before his name echoed through the world as the yellow flash, Minato was a soft-spoken boy with golden hair and eyes that shimmered like the morning sky. There was something serene about the way he moved, a quiet confidence, not born from pride, but from a deep well of purpose. He did not chase greatness with reckless ambition. Instead, greatness seemed to find him gently, like the sun rising to meet the earth. As a young ninja, he displayed a kind of brilliance that made time itself feel as though it slowed down around him. Even then, his movements were precise, efficient, almost poetic. But beneath his calm exterior lay a heart deeply attuned to the fragility of peace and the value of every life he vowed to protect. His journey through the academy was marked not by loud declarations, but by subtle victories. He earned the respect of peers and instructors alike, not because he demanded it, but because he inspired it. He was never the loudest voice, never the most imposing figure, yet he radiated a kind of light that others naturally followed. And it was during these early days that Minato met Kushina Uzumaki, a whirlwind of energy and fiery spirit, the exact opposite of his calm and composed self. She arrived at the village from the distant land of whirlpools, red hair wild and untamed, and a temper that flared brighter than the afternoon sun. At first, Minato seemed like nothing more than a quiet observer in her story, a gentle presence in the corner of her chaotic world. But in time, Kushina came to see what others already sensed, that there was something rare and steadfast in him, something as strong as it was silent. Their connection blossomed slowly, tenderly, like the petals of a flower unfolding after a long winter. It wasn't built on grand gestures, but on shared glances, moments of unspoken understanding, and the way Minato saw through Kushina's fiery exterior to the kindness and strength beneath. He saved her once, when she was kidnapped for the powerful chakra that flowed in her bloodline, tracking her captors by the trail of her long red strands. That night, when she asked why he had come, he simply replied that he had always admired her hair, that it reminded him of the setting sun. It was a small truth, wrapped in quiet reverence, and from that moment, their destinies began to intertwine more closely than either could have predicted. Minato's skill as a shinobi continued to grow at a breathtaking pace. He learned not just with his hands, but with his mind, absorbing tactics and jutsu with an ease that set him apart. Under the guidance of Jiraiya, the flamboyant, wise, and often eccentric Sanin, Minato honed his talents further. Jiraiya saw in him something extraordinary, even daring to wonder if his pupil might one day be the child of prophecy, the one destined to bring great change to the shinobi world. But Minato never carried that expectation with arrogance. He bore it the same way he carried everything else, quietly, responsibly, and with the unwavering resolve to protect what mattered most. When war came, as it so often did to the shinobi world, Minato stood at the forefront. The Third Great Ninja War was a brutal, bitter conflict, one that swallowed up hope and left only ash and ruin in its wake. But in the darkest hours of battle, Minato's light blazed with startling clarity. It was during this war that he earned the name that would echo for generations, the Yellow Flash, with the Flying Thunder, God technique, a complex space-time jutsu he had mastered and refined beyond recognition. Minato became an almost mythical figure on the battlefield. To his enemies, he was a blur of destruction, an unstoppable force that arrived and vanished before they could even draw breath. But to his comrades, he was something more, a shield, a protector, a symbol of hope when the sky grew dark and the future uncertain. One of his most defining moments during the war was the infamous Kanabi Bridge mission. Tasked with destroying the bridge to cut off enemy supply lines, Minato not only accomplished the mission flawlessly, but also saved his team. Kakashi Hatake, Obito Uchiha, and Rin Nohara from overwhelming danger. In that moment, he was not just a commander, but a mentor and guardian, laying the groundwork for what leadership and sacrifice truly meant. Though the shadows of that war would go on to claim the hearts of those he led, Minato's own light remained steady. In time, the war ended, and the hidden leaf stood battered but unbroken. Minato returned not just as a hero, but as a symbol of resilience. His reputation now towered like a monument carved in stone, yet he remained the same, humble, thoughtful, and kind. His relationship with Kushina deepened, maturing into a love both passionate and grounded. They married in a quiet ceremony, surrounded not by fanfare, but by warmth. And when they learned that Kushina was pregnant, joy bloomed in Minato's chest like the arrival of spring. Their child would be born into a fragile peace, and Minato vowed silently, with every beat of his heart, that he would protect this new life with all the strength and wisdom he had gained. As he stood at the edge of the future, Minato Namikaze had become not only a prodigy and a protector, but a father, a husband, and, unbeknownst to him, a symbol of legacy. Yet fate, as always, watched silently from the shadows, and the calm that surrounded him was not the end of the storm, but the quiet that comes just before its return. Minato Namikaze's story continued to unfold in the quiet moments before dawn. In the gentle way he smiled at Kushina's growing belly, in the way he held his hand over her stomach, as if trying to memorize the rhythm of their unborn child's heartbeat. There was a tenderness in him during that time, a hope that painted every step he took with purpose. As the Fourth Hokage, an honor he had been chosen for not by ambition, but because the village saw in him the steady flame of leadership. Minato balanced the weight of 1,000 decisions on his shoulders, yet he never let them dim the warmth in his eyes. He had taken the mantle from Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, during a time of uneasy peace. The wounds of the Third Great War still lingered beneath the surface, and Minato stepped into that role with both clarity and caution. But as the days passed and Kushina's due date approached, a storm began to stir in the corners of the world. Few in the village knew the secret that the Jinchuriki's pregnancy posed a grave risk. When a woman like Kushina, who housed the nine-tailed fox within her, went into labor, the seal that kept the beast bound would weaken. To keep her safe, the village arranged a secret and secluded location for the birth, guarded and protected under the most careful watch. Minato, ever vigilant, remained at her side, trusting in the systems he had helped build. But even the most meticulous plans cannot always account for the machinations of fate, or for the shadows that watch with silent malice. The night Naruto Uzumaki was born should have been one of the happiest in Minato's life. Instead, it became the night he faced the very embodiment of terror. A masked man, an intruder, cloaked in darkness and wielding the Sharingan, slipped through the village's defenses with unsettling ease. He struck with surgical precision, seizing Kushina at her most vulnerable and ripping the nine tails from her with cruel, calculated force. Minato barely had time to react, but his instincts, honed from years on the battlefield, carried him forward. In a flash of golden light, he rescued Kushina from the brink of death, teleporting her to safety. But the damage had already been done. The masked man, a specter from some forgotten hell, had unleashed the nine tails upon the hidden leaf. The village erupted in chaos. Buildings crumbled, streets split apart, and the night sky was lit with the fury of 1,000 fireballs. The nine tails rampaged with pure malice, its eyes glowing with hatred, its claws tearing through stone and steel as if they were paper. Amidst the horror, Minato stood like a pillar of unwavering light. He leapt into action, not with anger, but with a deep and focused calm. With the flying thunder god technique, he blinked across the battlefield like lightning, rescuing villagers from falling debris, shielding comrades from certain death, and locking the beast into place, even as it thrashed against the chains of sealing techniques. He confronted the masked man directly, and for the first time, Minato came face to face with the cruel intelligence behind the chaos. Their battle was swift and sharp, a clash of space-time jutsu and brutal hand-to-hand strikes. But Minato's precision was unmatched. With a Rasengan, his own invention, a swirling sphere of raw chakra, he drove the intruder back and marked him with his seal. In a blink, he teleported behind the man and struck, severing his hold over the Nine Tails. But the damage had already been done, and the beast was loose. As the Hokage, Minato made a decision that would define not only his legacy, but the life of his newborn son. He knew the Nine Tails could not be allowed to run rampant or fall into the hands of enemies. And so, he prepared a forbidden sealing technique, the dead demon consuming seal, a jutsu that would claim his life in exchange for binding the beast once more. But even then, in the face of death, Minato thought not just of duty, but of love. He could not bear to condemn Naruto to a childhood devoid of strength or purpose. And so he did not seal the entire Nine Tails away. He split its chakra in half, sealing the yin half within himself and the yang half within Naruto, trusting that one day his son would grow strong enough to master its power and use it to protect the world. Kushina, despite her injuries, begged to be allowed one final moment with their child. In a hushed and heart-wrenching scene, she and Minato wrapped their arms around their infant son and spoke to him with all the love they could carry in those last fleeting breaths. They told him of their hopes, of their dreams for his future, of the man he might become. Minato, with tears held back only by duty, etched a final message into the fabric of his son's soul, a prayer not just for strength, but for understanding, kindness, and connection. And then, together, they died. The village woke to the sight of the sun rising over scorched rooftops and smoking streets. The Nine Tails was gone, sealed away once more. The invader had vanished into the void, and at the center of the ruins, a baby cried. The Fourth Hokage had given everything to protect his people, his title, his strength, his future, and though his body lay still, his spirit remained, woven into the soul of a boy who would one day carry his torch forward. The village moved forward, as it always did, with quiet resilience, and the echoes of its fallen carved into the very stone of its monuments. The name Minato Namikaze was etched alongside those who had come before him, heroes and legends alike. But to many in the years that followed, he became more myth than memory. The Yellow Flash, the Fourth Hokage, the savior of Konoha, yet beneath the layers of reverence and retelling, there remained the truth of who he had been. A man of warmth, patience, and a depth of love that no war could erode. His sacrifice became the cradle in which Naruto Uzumaki would grow. And though Minato never watched his son take his first steps or stumble through the early years of academy training, his presence lingered, quietly, within the seal he had left behind. Time passed, as it always does. Konoha rebuilt. Naruto grew, a lonely child burdened by the legacy of something he didn't understand. The village saw only the shadow of the Nine Tails in his blue eyes, never the echo of the Fourth's smile. And so Minato's son wandered through childhood without knowing the shape of his father's hands or the sound of his voice, only that the name Fourth Hokage was said with reverence and never with the intimacy of a father. But even unseen, Minato's influence rippled through time. His jutsu, his philosophies, his teachings, these lingered in the hands of students like Kakashi Hatake, in the structure of the village's defenses, and most quietly of all, in the soul of the boy who bore his blood. Minato's legacy had not vanished. It was only sleeping. But elsewhere, beyond the veil of the living world, Minato's spirit did not rest in idle silence. When Orochimaru performed the forbidden Edo Tensei Jutsu during the Fourth Great Ninja War, summoning the previous Hokage from death itself, the world glimpsed Minato once more, not as a ghost, but as a warrior returned. Clad in the ceremonial robes of the Hokage, with the same calm strength in his eyes, he looked upon the world that had continued without him, and saw how far it had come, and how close it stood to the brink once again. It was during this war that Minato finally laid eyes on Naruto, no longer a child, but a young man forged by loneliness, friendship, and determination. At first, he said nothing. He simply looked. And in Naruto, he saw not only the seal he had carved with his dying hands, not only the glow of the nine tails flickering beneath the surface, but the very essence of Kushina's fire and his own hope burning fiercely in unison. Their son had grown into something extraordinary. And then Naruto spoke, not with awe or confusion, but with that same honest bluntness that had always defined him. He didn't know who Minato truly was at first, not entirely, only that the Fourth Hokage stood before him. But soon the truth came to light. The moment when Naruto realized, truly realized, that the man standing there was his father, was not filled with tears or dramatic declarations. Instead, it was quiet. There was a kind of peace in the way Naruto accepted it, not as a child meeting a long-lost parent, but as a shinobi understanding the roots of his own strength. They didn't have much time. The war pressed on, a storm of chakra and will colliding with forces older than history itself. But in those fleeting minutes, Minato saw the full circle of his life come to rest. His sacrifice had not been in vain. The boy he had entrusted his dream to had become the very light the world needed. Minato and Naruto fought side by side, father and son, present and future. And as they moved across the battlefield in tandem, it was clear that the gift Minato had given the world wasn't just the sealing of a beast or the death of a monster. It was Naruto himself. Yet still, the weight of the battle deepened. The masked man who had once torn the nine tails from Kushina returned, now revealed to be Obito Uchiha, a ghost from Minato's own past, a student once filled with promise and light, now warped by pain and despair. Their confrontation was steeped in tragedy, the kind that comes when the paths of mentor and pupil are twisted into conflict. Minato had failed to save Obito once, and the guilt of that failure had never truly left him. But now, as enemies on the battlefield, there was no room for regret, only action. They clashed with furious precision. Minato's movements were still as sharp as lightning, but Obito, too, had grown into something formidable. Their battle was not just of strength, but of memories, of what had been, and what could have been. Even as their jutsu collided, there was a sorrow beneath Minato's gaze, a soft recognition of the boy he had once known. But there was no time to mourn. The world was unraveling, and even Minato's speed could not slow the momentum of fate. And yet, in the eye of the storm, there was a moment of stillness. During the final phases of the war, as the threat of Kaguya Otsutsuki rose like a specter beyond comprehension, Minato's role shifted. He became more than a fighter. He became a beacon, one of the few anchors in the chaos that Naruto and the others could look to. He gave his chakra freely, fought without hesitation, and watched with pride as Naruto surpassed him, not in power alone, but in compassion, in conviction, in the ability to unite even the most fractured of hearts. And so, the Fourth Hokage fought not as a leader commanding from behind, but as a father standing beside his son, as a guardian shielding the last fragments of peace, as a man who once gave everything for the future, and now stood witness to that future unfolding in real time. On the battlefield, soaked with memories and ash, Minato moved like a whisper of the past made real. His kunai marked the air with glints of golden light, his teleportation still peerless, his resolve unshaken. Yet it was not merely his speed or his strength that set him apart now. It was the quiet clarity in his gaze, the knowledge that every second granted by this unnatural resurrection was a gift, a borrowed moment in the life he had once laid down. Minato watched as Naruto shouldered the weight of the shinobi world, uniting allies and enemies alike beneath one common will. He heard his son speak words of conviction that echoed beyond the clash of chakra and steel. And he saw, in those moments, the reflection of Kushina's spirit, fierce, unrelenting, and full of heart. It was not the power of the Nine Tails that made Naruto shine. It was not the seal Minato had placed with trembling hands. It was something deeper, something unteachable, something born of pain and shaped by hope. It was this that moved Minato the most, not the warrior Naruto had become, but the person. But war does not pause for sentiment. The stakes rose higher. The battlefield turned stranger. Time bent under the weight of ancient power, and the shinobi alliance found itself grappling with Kaguya Otsutsuki, a being not of their world, not of their rules. In the face of such overwhelming force, even the greatest shinobi seemed small. And yet they stood. Minato stood, Half of the Nine-Tails chakra resided within him, and in those vital moments, he gave of himself without hesitation. His arms, torn from him by the strange properties of truth-seeking orbs, did not slow him. He adapted, not with bitterness, but with composure. There was no space for self-pity, only focus. In the space between attacks and decisions, Minato's mind often wandered, not in distraction, but in reflection. He thought of Jiraiya, of their years under Hiruzen's guidance, of battles fought side by side and dreams shared under starlit skies. He thought of Kakashi, once so young and rigid, now standing with resolve in a war far greater than anything they had imagined. He thought of Rin, of Obito, of how quickly youth became memory. And he thought, always, of Kushina, her voice, her laughter, the flame in her spirit that had warmed him through the bitterest nights. He missed her like a lost limb, like breath itself. But he also knew that she was watching, somewhere beyond the veil, just as he now watched their son become the bridge between eras. Then came the sealing. Kaguya was bound, the world spared from the jaws of unmaking, and the battlefield stilled. But peace is never without a price. The jutsu that had returned Minato and the other Hokage to the living world had served its purpose. Their forms began to flicker, the light of death calling them home once more. There was no panic in Minato's eyes, only serenity. He had been given more than he could have hoped for. A chance to see his son grown, to fight by his side, to speak words left unsaid. And so, as the final moments approached, Minato turned to Naruto once more. There was no long goodbye, no need. He had spoken through action, through presence, through 1,000 unspoken things that fathers often struggle to articulate. But he gave Naruto something more. A memory. A quiet farewell. He told him that he believed in him, that he was proud, that he was sorry for the pain, that his mother would have been so proud, too. And in those words, Naruto received something no jutsu could replicate. Acceptance, belonging, the gentle weight of his father's hand, even if only for a moment. Minato's form dissolved into particles of light. The world around Naruto remained unchanged, but something inside him had settled. The void that had lingered in the quiet spaces of his heart was no longer so empty. He knew now, truly and without doubt, that he was loved, not just by those around him, but by the parents who had sacrificed everything before he had even opened his eyes. And though Minato returned to the silence of death, his legacy never faded. It endured in the wind that swept across the Hokage monument. It lived on in the hearts of those he had trained, protected, and inspired. But most of all, it lived in Naruto, who would go on to reshape the very world his father had once tried so hard to protect. The yellow flash had burned bright, fast, and brilliant. But his light did not vanish. It passed on like a torch, like a heartbeat, like a whisper in the wind, in the haze of war, with the ground trembling beneath the weight of centuries of hatred, and the sky split by the fury of gods and monsters. Minato Namikaze moved like a whisper of a dream, a flicker of gold and silence. Though no longer of the living, his presence carried the warmth of purpose and the chill of inevitability. His eyes no longer blinked with youth, but burned with a clarity only the dead can carry, having watched the world turn without them. Reanimated, summoned from death into a battlefield he never imagined, Minato was not just a piece on the board. He was a memory given flesh, a symbol given breath. He watched the boy he had once held in his arms, now grown into a man who bore the weight of nations on his shoulders. Naruto, the son he had died to protect. There was no mistaking it. Every gesture, every shout, every refusal to give in echoed with the same fire Minato had seen in Kushina. Naruto wasn't just fighting. He was illuminating. And in him, Minato saw not only what he had lost, but everything he had saved. He had imagined many versions of Naruto during those final moments of his life, wondered endlessly in the void of the afterlife what kind of man his son would become. But nothing could have prepared him for the truth. Naruto wasn't simply strong. He was kind. Fiercely, quietly, relentlessly kind. And that, Minato realized, was a strength greater than jutsu. He spoke to him not as a commander, not as a hero, but as a father who had been given a final gift, the chance to say the things he never could. The battlefield gave no time for tenderness, but the glances between them were thick with unspoken words. He wanted to tell him everything, that he had always believed in him, that not a moment had passed without hope, that his legacy was never the jutsu he'd mastered, but the boy he had loved with his last breath. And though there was no lull for such sentiments in a war where gods clashed and nations bled, Minato knew Naruto felt it. That unbreakable thread of connection, not forged through time, but sealed in blood and sacrifice. As the fight against Obito and Madara unfolded, Minato found himself standing beside those whose lives he had altered in ways large and small. Kakashi, with that same stoic resolve, his eye sharp but shadowed. And Obito, no longer the boy who once admired him, but a man twisted by loss and illusion. And yet, even in the horror that Obito had wrought, Minato saw a truth he couldn't deny. The boy he'd failed to save was still in there, somewhere behind the mask and madness. And for all his power, for all his sins, Obito's heart still bled. In that way, they were not so different. Each man had made choices. Each had lost. But where one had closed his heart, the other had kept his open until the end. Minato fought without ego. His Flying Thunder God. Technique still unmatched, still elegant in its terrifying precision. He blinked through the battlefield like lightning, a flash of death for enemies, a shield of hope for comrades. But each technique he used was less about destruction and more about protection. He was not here to win glory. He was here to buy time for Naruto, for the future, for the world that would come after the smoke cleared. He looked upon the allied shinobi forces, thousands strong, each man and woman a piece of something larger. It reminded him of what Konoha was meant to be, not just a village, but an idea, a promise that despite all the pain, something better could always be built. His heart, though silent, beat with that vision. And even among strangers, he saw his comrades. He saw glimpses of the will of fire burning quietly in each soul. The same will that once drove Hashirama and Hiruzen. The same fire that made him believe peace wasn't just a dream whispered in dying breaths, but a tangible thing to be passed down, like a flame protected through the storm. And then there was Shurama, the nine-tailed fox who had once torn through Konoha in a storm of fire and hate. Now, surprisingly, unexpectedly, a reluctant ally. Minato had sealed half of the beast inside himself, believing it the only way to ensure peace. But seeing Kurama now, changed by Naruto's compassion, softened not by force, but by trust, Minato felt something close to awe. For all his strength and insight, he had never imagined such a bond could be forged between man and monster. But Naruto had done it, without malice, without chains. And Kurama, in return, had become something more than a weapon. He had become a guardian. The irony wasn't lost on Minato. The thing he had feared most, the very reason he had died, had become the thing that helped save his son. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of humor. And so he fought on, side by side with his son, with his former students, with the beast he had once bound. Each of them threads in a story older and deeper than any jutsu. He could feel his time unraveling, like a seal weakening, like wind slipping through cupped hands. But there was no fear in him, only pride. As Naruto pushed forward, embodying everything that Minato and Kushina had hoped for in those last moments of life, Minato felt the weight of his regrets lift. He hadn't seen Naruto's first steps. He hadn't been there to comfort him through lonely nights. But he was here now, in this final hour. And that mattered. For just a breath in time, they stood together, father and son, warrior and heir. And in that stillness, amidst the chaos of a world ending and beginning all at once, Minato Namikaze found peace not in victory, but in presence. He was where he needed to be. Time was unraveling. The edges of Minato's reanimated existence frayed like parchment catching flame, slow at first, then inevitable. Yet even as his body, rebuilt by forbidden jutsu, trembled against the cracks of its own impermanence, his spirit remained rooted. The war surged on in kaleidoscopic violence, summoned beasts roaring into the heavens, ancient powers colliding in waves of fire and earth and despair. But Minato, the Fourth Hokage, stood unmoved, not by fear, not by pain, only by memory. The battlefield was a mirror, reflecting not just the chaos of the present, but echoes of the past. Obito, once his student, now stood in the eye of this storm, a vessel for the Ten Tails, consumed by the ambitions of Madara, but still haunted by the ghost of the boy he used to be. There were moments, brief, almost imperceptible, when Minato could see the shimmer of that boy in Obito's eyes, the one who had once wanted to be Hokage, the one who had laughed with Rin, who had competed with Kakashi, who had looked up to his sensei with wonder. And every time he caught that glimpse, it twisted inside him, not because of anger, but because of failure. Minato had been hailed as a prodigy, a genius among geniuses, a hero who turned the tides of wars. But no amount of brilliance could erase the truth. He hadn't been able to save Obito. Not really. He had reacted too slowly, hadn't asked the right questions, hadn't seen the signs when it might have mattered most. And the boy who once admired him had become a man who tried to crush the very world Minato gave his life to protect. But still, he didn't hate him. Even as Obito unleashed devastation, even as he declared himself the savior of a world too broken to save, Minato felt sorrow more than fury, because buried beneath that darkness, there was still a fragment of light. And Minato believed, perhaps more stubbornly than even Naruto, that no one was ever truly beyond saving. And Naruto had become something more than just his son. He had become a force of nature, a presence so bright it seemed to fight the night itself. Minato could feel it every time they fought side by side. That synchronicity, that wordless connection only a father and son could share. The rhythm of their attacks, the mirrored movement, the instinctive trust. It was as if they had been born for this. Two halves of the same heartbeat, separated by time and death, now reunited on the edge of everything. Kurama, the nine tails sealed inside Naruto, was no longer a prisoner, no longer a weapon. Minato had once only known the beast as wrath incarnate, a maelstrom of chakra and rage, whose very existence threatened to collapse the leaf. But Naruto had reached into the fox's heart and found something Minato never expected: pain, loneliness, a longing for acknowledgement. And through kindness, through patience, Naruto had given even a tailed beast something sacred, a reason to believe. Kurama's power now moved with Naruto, not against him. And when Minato looked upon the two of them, boy and beast, united by something deeper than a seal. He felt pride swell where once there had only been fear. The war turned again. Madara's shadow loomed larger than ever. With Obito dethroned as the Ten-Tails Jinchuriki, Madara seized the mantle, ascending beyond death into something neither living nor dead. A god in form, if not in spirit. Minato fought with everything he had, every last drop of chakra, every flicker of movement traced back to the golden age of his life. His teleportation became desperation. His strikes bore the weight of legacy. But even he, the yellow flash, began to fade. His arm, ripped from his body in battle, refused to regenerate, a sign that his time was drawing near. But he didn't despair. He'd been given a gift, to see his son grown, to fight beside him, to witness the culmination of dreams he had once only dared whisper to Kushina in the quiet of night. Those dreams were no longer fragile things. They were alive, breathing, shining. And then came the moment, quiet, brief, where Naruto called him Dad. A word so simple, but it froze the world around Minato. For a second, the battlefield dissolved. No Madara, no war, no past. Just a boy and his father, separated by death, connected by love. That one word healed something in Minato that had been quietly breaking for years. All the nights he wasn't there, all the birthdays missed, all the first steps and skinned knees and whispered secrets he had never heard. They were not erased, but forgiven. And he thought then of Kushina, her final words to Naruto, her hope that he'd grow up healthy and kind and never walk the world alone. She would be proud of Naruto, yes, but also of Minato, for protecting that hope, for holding on to it through the blood and sorrow and war, for living just long enough to see it realized. Minato stood as the light of dawn cracked the horizon, painting the ash and rubble in soft gold, and he knew that the end was near. But endings, he realized, were not always tragedies. Some were crescendos. Some were symphonies, played with every ounce of one's soul, leaving behind echoes that would never fade. He didn't need statues. He didn't need to be remembered as the Fourth Hokage, because Naruto lived. And in that, Minato Namikaze would live forever. The sky above the battlefield no longer felt like it belonged to the same world Minato had once known. The landscape had been torn apart by gods, reshaped by chakra that bent time and space, stretched by dimensions not meant for mortal minds. Minato, now existing in a liminal state, reanimated yet utterly human in feeling, moved like a shadow of the past among a generation that had finally surpassed the legends. And that, he thought, was how it should be. The old did not exist to forever guide the new, but simply to light the path before stepping quietly aside. Yet even as he accepted this truth, He felt the weight of every moment in his chest, like a distant echo. He was nearing the end, again. But this time, it wasn't fear that filled him. It was quiet satisfaction. He watched Naruto closely, not just as a father, but as a shinobi, a Hokage, a man who had lived and died for the dream of peace. Naruto's face, battered but bright, burned with a fire that reminded him so strongly of Kushina, it nearly made him weep. That same unshakable will, that refusal to give in, that stubborn heart that believed always that people could be saved. But Naruto had something Minato and Kushina hadn't possessed in the same way. He had turned loneliness into warmth. He had forged bonds stronger than any jutsu. He had chosen forgiveness again and again, even when vengeance would have been easier. There was something divine in that choice, something sacred. It made Minato proud in a way no technique or victory ever had. Beside him, the reanimated forms of Hashirama, Tobirama, Hiruzen, all pillars of the village, stood like monuments brought briefly back to life, their legacies entwined with his. But he no longer felt smaller in their presence. Once, as a boy, he had wondered whether he would ever measure up to them. But now, he saw the truth. Each generation bore its own burdens. Each era needed its own kind of strength. And his, though brief, though bookended by tragedy, had mattered. Not because of the power he wielded, but because of the sacrifices he had made and the love he had left behind. As the battle against Kaguya reached its height, Minato gave his all. His flying thunder god technique still flashed through space like lightning on command, but his body, already half gone, moved with effort now. His chakra flickered like a candle in the wind. Still, when Naruto needed him, he was there. When Kakashi faltered, he stepped in. When Sakura screamed across the dimension for help, his hand was already reaching. And when Sasuke's eyes met his, filled with that quiet, heavy understanding of loss, Minato simply nodded. He knew what it was to carry everything alone. He knew what it meant to have loved ones buried beneath the weight of a dream. And when the moment finally came, when the world tipped back into balance, when Kaguya was sealed and the sun began to rise, again, over the broken fragments of earth, Minato stood still, letting the warmth touch him one last time. Not everyone had survived. Many villages had lost more than names and faces. They had lost faith. But he also saw something else. He saw unity. He saw enemies carrying each other. He saw stone-faced warriors weeping for boys they had once called foes. He saw in the weary arms of shinobi the beginnings of something new, the first fragile breaths of peace. Naruto approached him slowly, as if sensing the moment that was coming. His eyes, so impossibly familiar, didn't look away. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a bridge. between generations, between nations, between the past and the future. Minato smiled, not because he was leaving, but because he could leave, because there was someone now who could carry the fire forward, someone who could love this world even after it had hurt him, someone who could see beauty in the broken. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. A hand on a shoulder, a glance that said everything words never could. And then, as the reanimation technique reached its final limit, Minato felt his chakra begin to unravel, not painfully, gently, as though the universe itself was letting go with kindness. He turned his head upward, watching the clouds shift through golden morning light. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt light again. He thought of Kushina, of her voice, her hair, her laughter, her fierce protection. He imagined her standing at the gates of whatever came next, arms folded, impatient and smiling, saying, "Took you long enough?" He laughed, a small, tired sound, but full of peace. His last thoughts weren't of war, or power, or even sacrifice. They were of small things, a boy's hand in his, a woman's embrace, the quiet smell of the sea near the village on summer nights, the laughter of children on the training fields, the dream he had once held, so fragile and impossible, that the world could be better, that love could endure, that peace could win. And as his form dissolved into light, Minato Namikaze became not just a memory, but a part of the story that would guide generations. His soul, free at last, passed through silence, not the silence of loss, but the silence of completion. And the wind, ever gentle in Konohagakure, rustled through the leaves as if to whisper, he was here, and it mattered.